The Xilarian exploration fleet drifted through the cold darkness of space, their ships scanning the empty void for anything of interest. Captain Varric sat in his command chair, his yellow eyes fixed on the large view screen. The mission was simple: survey uncharted space and report any findings back to the High Council. So far, nothing. Just endless silence. Then a signal blinked on the scanner. "Captain, we have detected something," said Lieutenant Auric, his long fingers moving over the control panel. "It appears to be a derelict warship, human origin." A murmur spread across the bridge. A human warship. Here, that was impossible. Humanity had been wiped out long ago. The war against them had been brutal, but in the end, the Xilarian Empire had won. Every human fleet had been destroyed. Every human colony had been wiped out. So how could there be a warship still floating in deep space? "Visuals," Varric ordered. The screen flickered, and there it was, a massive blackened warship drifting through space like a ghost. Its hull was ancient, covered in scars and battle damage. Some parts were still glowing faintly, as if energy still lingered inside. "Are we picking up any life signs?" Varric asked. "Negative," Auric replied. "No heat signatures. No movement. It's completely dead." The bridge crew exhaled in relief. If the ship was lifeless, it was just a piece of space debris. "Proceed with a deep scan," Varric commanded. "Let's find out what we're dealing with." The ship's scanners powered up, sending a pulse of energy toward the human warship. Data started appearing on the screen. Hull composition, internal structure, power readings. Everything seemed normal. Until it wasn't. The lights on the Xilarian bridge flickered. The consoles glitched. A sharp, high-pitched whine filled the ship, making the crew cover their ears. "Captain, something is wrong," Auric yelled. Before Varric could respond, the human warship moved. Not just a little. It turned. The bridge went silent. No one could believe what they were seeing. The ship had been dead a moment ago. Now it was turning toward them, its weapons coming online. "Impossible," whispered one of the officers. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the Xilarian ship's speakers. "Unauthorized scan detected. You shouldn't have done that." Varric's blood turned cold. "Break off the scan. Now," he shouted. But it was too late. The human warship's systems awoke completely. Weapons locked onto the Xilarian fleet. Energy readings spiked far beyond anything normal. "Captain, the ship is scanning us back," Auric gasped. It's reading our entire fleet. Our ship codes, weapon systems, even crew files." A sudden shockwave rocked their vessel, cutting him off. The Xilarian ship's lights dimmed to red. Warning alarms blared across the bridge. "All power has been rerouted," another officer shouted. "Something is taking control." Varric tried to stay calm, but he could feel the growing fear in his crew. He turned back to the view screen. The human warship had finished its scan, and now it was fully awake. The deep voice returned, colder than before. "Experiment successful. Phase 2 begins." Then the first Xilarian ship vanished. Not destroyed. Not attacked. The Xilarian fleet had survived countless battles, but nothing had ever prepared them for this. One moment, their sister ship, the Valkar, had been floating beside them, scanning the human warship. The next moment, it was gone, vanished without an explosion, without debris, without any trace at all. Captain Varric's fingers dug into his command chair. His yellow eyes darted across the flickering console screens. His crew was in panic. What just happened?" Auric stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The ship's sensors were still active, desperately searching for the Valkar. But there was nothing. No distress signal. No wreckage. No trace of its crew. It was as if it had been erased from existence. "Find that ship," Varric snapped. We can't," said another officer. "It's not just destroyed, Captain. It's like it never existed." The bridge crew exchanged fearful glances. This was impossible. Even the most powerful weapons in the galaxy left something behind. Heat signatures, radiation bursts, broken remains. But this was something else entirely. And then, the human warship moved again. It wasn't fast. It wasn't aggressive. But it was deliberate. A slow, unsettling drift, like a predator circling its prey. The ship's energy levels are still rising, Auric reported, his voice shaking. I don't even know what we're looking at anymore, Captain. This isn't normal. Varric exhaled sharply. He had spent his entire career fighting wars, crushing rebellions, and conquering planets. But for the first time in his life, he felt something he never thought possible. Fear. We need to retreat, he muttered. Auric's head snapped toward him in shock. Captain, the High Council ordered us to investigate. The High Council isn't here. Varric barked, standing from his chair. I don't care what they want. That ship just deleted the Valkar from existence. We are leaving. Now. The crew scrambled to obey, their fingers flying across control panels. The engines roared to life, and the Xelarian flagship, the Dreadspire, turned away from the human warship, preparing for a full-speed retreat. But the human warship reacted instantly. Its dark hull flashed with unnatural light. Lines of pulsing red energy slithered across its surface, forming strange, ancient symbols. The ship had no visible weapons, no missile bays, no turrets. But the Xelarians knew one thing. It didn't need them. A strange pulse rippled through space. It wasn't an explosion, nor was it a typical energy wave. It was something different, something alive. The Xelarians felt it before their instruments even registered it. A deep, unnatural pressure sank into their chests, like an invisible force pressing down on their souls. And then the ship's systems failed all at once. Lights flickered. Screens turned to static. Every single engine, shield, and weapon went completely dead. They were trapped. Systems are down, Auric shouted, slamming his fists on the console. We've lost control of everything. Varric's jaw tightened. Restart emergency power. I'm trying, Auric yelled back. Something's blocking it. Varric turned toward the massive screen in front of them. The human warship was still drifting slowly, silently. No weapons fired, no threats given, and yet it owned them. The eerie voice returned, deeper than before. You came looking for answers. The words sent a chill down every Xelarian's spine. Now you will learn why you were never meant to find them. The pulse hit again, and another Xelarian ship disappeared. No explosion, no escape pods, just gone. Varric's hands trembled. This wasn't just an enemy. This was something beyond understanding. Something that didn't fight wars the way the Xelarians did. Is it reading us? Auric asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Varric didn't answer, because deep down, he already knew the truth. It wasn't just scanning them. It was deciding what to do with them. Varric could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His crew was frozen in fear. The human warship had done the impossible. It had erased 2 of their ships without a trace. No explosions, no wreckage, no distress signals. Just gone. The bridge of the Dreadspire was silent, except for the flickering of dead screens and the faint hum of emergency power trying to restart. Varric gritted his teeth, gripping the armrests of his chair. This is a nightmare, Auric whispered. What are we even fighting against? Varric didn't answer. His mind was racing. His ship was stranded, powerless. Their entire fleet was at the mercy of something they didn't understand. A new sound echoed through the ship. A low, inhuman whisper. It wasn't coming from their communication systems. It wasn't coming from the ship's speakers. It was inside their minds. You have seen what should have remained hidden. Varric's body went cold. The voice was emotionless, yet it carried power. The kind of power that didn't just speak to them. It spoke through them. Auric gasped, his hands trembling. Captain, It's in my head. Varric forced himself to stay calm. Focus, he barked. Whatever this thing is, it wants us afraid. We need to think. But how could they think when nothing made sense? The human warship wasn't attacking them like a normal enemy. It wasn't using missiles or lasers. It was using something else, something that bent the very laws of reality. And then the lights turned red. It wasn't the ship's normal emergency lighting. It was wrong. Dark shadows stretched across the walls, moving unnaturally like living things. The screens, which had been flickering with static, suddenly showed something horrifying. The faces of the lost Solarian crew. They weren't screaming. They weren't pleading for help. They were just staring. Their empty yellow eyes locked onto the crew of the Dreadspire, their expressions frozen in something between fear and understanding. Oryx stumbled backward, shaking his head. No, this isn't real. Varric grabbed his officer by the arm, forcing him to look away. It isn't real. Stay with me, Oryx. But the rest of the crew was breaking. Some were whispering to themselves, their eyes darting around in panic. Others were gripping their heads, trying to block out the voice still speaking inside their minds. You were warned. Varric clenched his fists. We were never warned, he shouted, as if challenging the unseen force. We only scanned your ship. That was it. For the first time, there was silence. The voice stopped. The ship stopped. And then something far worse happened. The human warship finally turned to face them. It had remained still before, only drifting slowly. But now, for the first time, it moved with purpose. Its dark metal hull shimmered, shifting like it wasn't entirely solid. The strange red symbols across its surface pulsed like a heartbeat. And then, the sensors came back online. Oryx gasped. Captain, you need to see this. Varric turned to the flickering screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. The scanned results were back. The human warship wasn't just a warship. It wasn't made of normal metal. It was made of something living. Captain, Oryx swallowed hard. This ship, it's not a machine. Varric stared at the screen, his mind struggling to understand. Then what is it? Oryx looked up, his face pale. It's a predator. Varric's hands clenched. He had fought monsters before. He had faced horrors on the battlefield. But this was something older, something that didn't just destroy ships. It consumed them. And they were next. The bridge of the Dreadspire was drowning in silence, but it was not the silence of safety. It was the silence of waiting doom. Every crew member felt it. The oppressive weight in the air, the unnatural red glow bleeding from the human warship, the eerie whispering that had stopped only to be replaced by something worse, expectation. Varric's claws dug into his chair's armrests. His officers were still trembling, some gripping the edges of their consoles so tightly their fingers had turned pale. The sensors had finally worked again, but the readings made no sense. The human warship was alive. Oryx's voice cracked. Captain, it's scanning us now. Varric stiffened. What? A new alert flickered on the screens. Unknown entity has initiated deep scan protocol. Estimated time until full analysis, 30 seconds. Oryx's hands hovered over the controls, but his body refused to move. They're scanning us the way we scanned them, he whispered. Varric snapped out of his shock. Cut all transmissions. Shut down every system that sends a signal. Oryx's fingers flew over the console, disabling all outgoing signals. But the scan didn't stop. Varric clenched his jaw. They're scanning without using normal tech. Oryx's eyes darted to the captain, full of fear. Then what are they using? No one had an answer. The ship trembled. It wasn't a normal tremor from weapons or thrusters. It was deeper, a vibration that sank into their bones. The walls seemed to pulse, the metal groaning like something alive was pressing against it. And then the screens changed again. One by one, every display flickered, and an image replaced the sensor data. It was the human warship, but not how they saw it before. It was opening. Panels on its dark metal hull shifted apart, revealing something beneath. At first, it looked like weapons, but then Varric realized the truth. Those weren't weapons. Those were teeth. Rows and rows of jagged, shifting, mechanical fangs, glowing with the same red energy that pulsed across its body. The warship wasn't just a predator. It was a hunter. A new message appeared on the screen. But this time, it wasn't written in the Solarian language. It was in their minds. The hunt begins. Panic hit the crew like a tidal wave. One officer staggered back, clawing at his head. Another tried to activate the thrusters, but the controls wouldn't respond. The ship's locked down. Auric shouted, "It's overriding our systems." Varric forced himself to think. Fear is the enemy. Focus. Think. "Can we reboot manually?" he barked. Auric checked the emergency controls, but his face fell. "It's in our systems, Captain. It's rewriting them." Varric's stomach twisted. Rewriting? The screens flashed again. Their own crew manifest appeared, but something had changed. Each name now had a status next to it. Processing. The meaning was clear. The warship wasn't just scanning them. It was deciding what to do with them. Varric slammed his fist against the armrest. "Weapons. Can we still fire?" Auric checked. His breath caught in his throat. "Yes, but, Captain." Varric turned to him sharply. "What?" Auric swallowed hard. "The targeting system. It's locked. It's forcing us to aim at our own ships." Varric froze. Every surviving Solarian vessel in the fleet was now painted as an enemy target. The warship was toying with them. It wanted them to turn against each other. The realization sent ice through Varric's veins. This wasn't just an attack. This was psychological warfare. The humans weren't simply destroying their fleet. They were breaking them. And the worst part, the hunt had only just begun. The bridge of the Dreadspire felt like a tomb. No one spoke. No one moved. The screen still showed the terrifying message. "The hunt begins." Varric's claws twitched. His crew stared at the displays in frozen horror. Their ship, one of the most advanced in the Solarian fleet, was now under someone else's control. Not just anyone. The humans. Auric's voice was barely a whisper. "Captain, what do we do?" Varric forced himself to think. Fear had already consumed his crew. He couldn't afford to let it consume him. "Status report," he snapped. "Are the weapons still locked?" Auric checked, his eyes darting across the corrupted systems. "Yes, Captain. Targeting is still locked on our own fleet. If we fire, we'll be killing our own ships." A low, bitter growl escaped Varric's throat. The humans weren't attacking. They were watching, studying, waiting to see what the Solarians would do to themselves. "Can we disable the weapons manually?" Varric asked. Auric hesitated. "Maybe, if we physically sever the power connections to the main cannon systems. But, Captain," he gulped, "our engineers are reporting movement." Varric's eyes narrowed. What kind of movement? Auric's hands shook as he pointed at the screen. "Inside the ship, Captain." Varric turned to the security officer. "Confirm." The security officer's scales had turned pale. "It's true, Captain. The internal sensors are detecting something moving in the lower decks." Varric's mind raced. That was impossible. No one had boarded them. No ships had docked. There was no way anything could be inside. And yet, another alert flashed. "Atmospheric disturbance detected. Engineering bay." A cold dread settled over the crew. Varric knew what this meant. Something was inside. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. A deep, guttural groan echoed through the ship's speakers. The sound wasn't natural. It wasn't mechanical. It was hungry. The crew snapped into action. Security teams were deployed, armed and ready. Every officer on the bridge was locked in place, watching the screen as the security feed loaded. The camera flickered. At first, nothing moved. The engineering bay was silent, filled with cables, machines, and diagnostic screens. But then, something shifted. A shadow moved across the screen. Not fast, not aggressive. Slow, deliberate. A figure stepped into view. It was human. Or at least, it looked human. Its body was covered in a dark, metallic exoskeleton, smooth and unnatural. Its eyes glowed red, just like the warship. The movement was wrong. Too smooth, too controlled, like it wasn't walking but gliding. And then it turned. Its head snapped toward the camera. The feed cut to static. The entire bridge went silent. No one breathed. No one spoke. Then a new alert flashed. "You shouldn't have looked." The words burned into the screen. Varric's blood ran cold. The human warship wasn't just a ship. It wasn't just technology. It was something else. Something far worse. The security teams never reported back. They went in. They never came out. And then, one by one, the lights across the ship began to shut down. The bridge of the Dreadspire was drowning in darkness. One by one, the lights had died. One by one, the systems had failed. One by one, the crew had disappeared. Varric gripped the armrest of his chair, his claws sinking into the metal. He was running out of time. Oryx's voice cracked with fear. "Captain, we need to abandon ship." Varric didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the screen, where the last known footage from the engineering bay still flickered. The human thing had turned toward the camera. Then the feed had cut. The security team sent to investigate had never responded. And now they were all trapped. A sharp sound echoed through the bridge, claws scraping against metal. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It wasn't a system error. It was real. "Security," Varric barked. "Report." Silence. Then, a deep, slow breathing came through the comms. Not from a Zilarian. Not from anything they understood. The crew turned pale. Their eyes darted around the darkened bridge, searching, waiting. A console flickered back to life. It wasn't Oryx who rebooted it. It wasn't anyone on the bridge. The words typed themselves onto the screen. "We let you watch. Now it's our turn." The ship's temperature dropped. Frost formed on the metal walls, thin and unnatural. Breath misted in the cold air. Something was coming. "Get us out of here," Varric roared. Oryx's hands flew across the controls, trying to restore navigation. I can't, Captain. The ship won't respond." Another alert. Docking bay doors opening. Varric's mind raced. Who gave that order? No one answered. Then a crew member gasped. "Something's boarding us." The external cameras blinked on, not by their command. The feed showed the docking bay doors sliding open, and in the vast emptiness of space, something moved. Not a ship. Not a drone. Something else. It didn't float like a body in zero gravity. It didn't drift like wreckage. It walked. Like it didn't care about space. Like it wasn't affected by it. Step by step, it moved through the vacuum and entered the Dreadspire. The doors sealed behind it. The bridge screens flickered again. The ship's eye, what was left of it, tried to resist. But it was no use. A new message burned across every screen. "We're here." And then the screaming began. A terrible silence fell over the bridge of the Dreadspire. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the cold, creeping fear that slithered into the bones of every Xilarian still alive. Varric gripped his weapon tightly. His breathing was shallow, his mind racing. Something had boarded them. Not a soldier, not a machine. Something worse. Oryx's hands trembled over the controls. "Captain, there's something wrong with the ship. We're locked out of the system." Varric already knew. The lights were flickering, not because of a power failure, but because something else was in control. Then the sound returned. A whisper. It didn't come from the speakers. It didn't come from the comms. It came from inside the bridge. One of the crew members, Kren, let out a choked scream and staggered backward. As something's here. The others turned just in time to see a shadow move. It wasn't like any creature they had seen before. It was tall, wrong, shifting like smoke, but walking like a predator. It had no eyes, but they could all feel it staring at them. Then the lights cut out completely. Total darkness. Varek barely had time to react before the screaming started. Kren's voice turned into a wet gurgle. The sound of something tearing flesh echoed through the bridge. Something massive moved in the dark. Someone fired a plasma weapon. The green light of the blast revealed a horrifying sight. Kren was gone. Only a smear of dark blood remained on the wall. The plasma shot had done nothing to the creature. It turned its head toward them. And it smiled. A horrible, human-like grin stretched too wide. Varek had seen enough. "Run," he roared. Orek didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the emergency exit, slamming his claws against the panel. It didn't open. The bridge doors were locked. They were trapped. The whispers returned. More voices. Not one. Many. "You wanted to see," they whispered. "Now you do." The air grew heavy. Varek's vision blurred. His body felt wrong, unnatural, like something was reaching inside him. A deep, horrible realization crept into his mind. It wasn't just a creature. It was something else. Something that had been inside the warship this whole time. Something that wasn't human anymore. Something that was waiting. The ship's AI flickered on for one last moment. The emergency protocols activated. A single message flashed across the screens. Containment breach. Self-destruct activated. Varek's heart pounded. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or horrified. The humans knew. They had always known. This was never just a warship. It was a prison. And now, the Dreadspire was part of it. The last thing Varek heard before the explosion was the sound of laughter.